Hello, I'm Charles Kovess, Australasia's passion provocateur, and welcome to this week's episode of the Charles Kovess Show, whether you're watching on Rumble or YouTube or listening via one of the many podcasting platforms. I will discuss a few current challenging issues that impact on us, and then explore how the self-awareness and passion quest principles of this show can be used by you to elegantly handle these issues. I will also share some resources that will be helpful for you in the next steps in your journey. The show notes give you links to background details about me and the foundational principles of this show, and secondly, links to our websites kovess.com and charleskovess.com, where you can find my books, my passion speeches and programs, including the self-awareness and passion quest, and lots of very useful and free resources. Please subscribe to the show. It won't cost you anything except the risks of greater passion, greater awareness, and a greater enjoyment of your life. So let's go with this week's big impact issues and how to handle them using the self-awareness and passion principles. So as I'm recording this show, it's Australia Day, 26 January 2025. And I want to talk about Australia Day in the context of national culture, and for you to think about your national culture wherever you are watching or listening. Every nation has a national day. It's meant to be a celebration of the nation. My parents were refugees from Hungary, as regular viewers and listeners would know, and in Hungary, the equivalent of Australia Day is Hungarian National Day on March the 15th. Now, that date was selected because it commemorates March 15, 1848, where Hungary extricated itself from the control of Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the themes of the Hungarian National Day are independence and democracy. Prior to 15 March 1848, it was the Emperor of Austria who essentially ran things in Hungary. It's a big deal, the National Day in Hungary, and it's a big deal in Australia and in many countries. For America, of course, it's the 4th of July, celebrating the Declaration of Independence of 1776. What is the culture of a nation? What is Australian culture? What is Hungarian culture? What is American culture? My favourite definition of culture, I use it in my corporate training programs, but it's also relevant to a nation. Culture is what people do when no one is telling them what to do or forcing them to do something. What do people naturally do in Australia, in the UK, in Hungary, in America? And what difference is it in Canada, for example, or in Peru, where Julie knows people? What do people naturally do? That's what a culture is. And the question I pose to you is, what do you want your national culture to be? Because a nation's culture is developed by the people who live in it, the way that the people behave. My parents came here and they adapted to the Australian culture. This is an important question. What do you want your national culture to be? Do you want it to stay as is? Do you want it to be different? I also say that not all national cultures are of equal value. Australia is finding that out now, this idea of multiculturalism. Yes, we honour all cultures. In one sense, yes, we allow you to have a national culture, but Australia's culture does not make every culture of equal value. Best, I can think of 20 nations whose cultures I wouldn't want anything to do with. I much prefer Australian culture. I don't want that culture, those other 20 cultures that I'm thinking of, to come to Australia. And people who live in those, what I call crappy cultures, if they are enjoying that, great, stay there. Don't bring it to Australia. Don't take it as a migrant to somewhere else because the people in those countries, the country to which you're migrating, they don't want that culture. Now, this awareness around culture is crucially important, and your awareness around it is in your self-awareness journey. So what sort of culture do I want in my country? That's my critical question I'm posing to you. Culture clearly develops. The culture in Australia in the 19th century is different to the culture in the 21st century. I'll give you 3 playful examples. In 1965, wearing miniskirts to the thoroughbred horse racing was an absolute no-no. And Jean Shrimpton, a beautiful model, came out from the UK and turned up at the races in a miniskirt. Oh, shock horror. Second example, wearing bikinis on the beach. In Australia, you had to be fully clothed, and it was a big fight to allow women to be wearing bikinis. Men had to wear full bathing suits as well from top to bottom. Obviously changed. Third example for Australia is drinking wine. In the 50s and the 60s, you were considered to be a wog, a dago, if you drank wine. Australians drank beer and spirits, not wine, even though there were winemakers in Australia from the 19th century. Quite interesting, isn't it? So those cultural elements changed and developed. I can think of another 20, to use 20 as a number, make it 21. 21 different cultures that have changed in my lifetime in this country. So we accept that cultures developed, and then migrants have come to Australia. Australia's population at the end of World War II was 5 million. It's now 26 million. That's a massive influx of people that haven't come from randy Australians having sex and producing lots of babies. It's from lots of immigration. So the migration comes, has influence, and then culture develops. Now you say, what's the Australian culture? And I'll focus on this, but I'll pose the question to you. In your nation, what are the core elements of your nation's culture? Well, for an Australian, here's 5. The first one, give everyone a fair go. That's the terms we use. Secondly, don't be an aristocrat. Don't be a prick. Don't be an asshole. Don't consider yourself to be superior to anybody else. You and I and everyone else, there's an egalitarianness in Australia that certainly doesn't apply in the UK. Thirdly, don't pick on those who can't look after themselves. Interesting, isn't it? Don't pick on those. Don't pick on weak kids. Don't pick on people who aren't anywhere near as strong as you. Don't pick a fight with someone who you can clearly beat. Fourthly, give your mate a hand. And everyone's your mate. G'day, mate. We help those who need a hand. It's a little bit like the movies I've seen of the Amish. I don't have much experience of this, but, the Amish community gets around and helps each other, and amazing outcomes are generated. Give your mate a hand. And fifthly, particularly in my role as chairman of the Australian Institute of Comedy, you got to laugh, mate. Don't take anything too seriously, including death. You got to laugh. And the Aussie sense of humour is renowned. So there are 5 core elements to being an Aussie. Give people a fair go. Don't be a prick. Don't pick on those weaker than you. Give your mate a hand. You got to laugh, mate. That's the saying. You got to laugh, mate. So the problem with our culture is we don't push back against attempts by small minorities to change our culture, to cause dramatic changes to our culture. And I'll give you some examples. We don't push back against Aboriginals who say this is stolen land. I say bullshit. And as a former lawyer, Aboriginals didn't have land ownership. They occupied this land when they first came here. This whole idea that they owned this land is a ridiculous notion. And now the Aborigines are trying to say you are all illegal occupiers on this land. You see, what's happening now in Victoria, in Australia, we rejected the voice referendum that wanted to create two classes of people in this place, totally contrary to our culture. Now in Victoria, the Victorian leftist government, outrageous, one of the worst governments ever in Victoria's history, is trying to do a treaty with Aborigines. Now, Aborigines comprise less than 3%, officially 4%, but people can consider themselves as Aborigines if they're 1/16th Aborigine. Total Wanksville. Now, the treaty that's being proposed is a bit like the New Zealand treaty that I consider to be a disaster, where a tiny minority gets an equal vote with the majority. That's not having a fair go. And the reason why they're getting away with this is because the average person is not speaking up. The next example is the push for wokeness. And I reject wokeness. Regular viewers and listeners would know that. And the whole woke agenda, diversity, equality, inclusiveness, I reject. The transgender movement. You see, what we say is in Australia, oh, that's okay. We're kind. We'll let them, if people want to identify, if a bloke wants to identify as a woman, that's fine. However, you then get into the stuff that's being taught in schools to 5-year-olds that your gender is a matter of choice. And the reason why they get away with it is because most people are too busy running their lives and they just let this stuff happen. And this is creeping cultural change. Next example, political correctness. Oh no, don't say anything, don't offend anybody, don't trigger anybody. The whole game of political correctness. Oh, you can't say that. And now statues being attacked in Australia of people who played a core role in developing Australia to what it is now. I mean, have a look at the culture of Australia now compared to what it was in 1770. Right? This was literally bushland. The whole of Australia was bushland. That was a culture. I don't want that culture. And the fact is that hardly anybody wants that culture in this country. Next, the climate emergency crap. All right, creeping steps, step by step. And suddenly we buy into this, the elites in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane and particularly Canberra, the elites in the main capital cities, also happens in Canada and America, where sense seems to disappear out of people's heads. And suddenly people are going, oh yes, we've got to save the planet because carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is causing the climate to change dramatically. From previous shows, you know my view on this, and I've had a lot of experience in this space. That is total nonsense. Total nonsense. CO2 is not a poison. Our world without CO2 would disappear. Now, there are some who want human beings to disappear off this planet. That's a cultural step. I don't want it to disappear. Next one is Islamic culture. Okay, Islam, there are some 700,000 Muslims in this country out of 26 million. I say the UK is lost to Islam. In 30 years, it will be an entirely Islamic country. I don't want Islamic culture adopted in this country. And that also leads to dual or triple legal systems where Muslims want a separate legal system and Aborigines want a separate legal system. No, if you come to this country, you are governed by one legal system. And so you can see all these small groups, I promise you, they're minority groups pushing a particular agenda. And because Australians go, oh, I'll give you a fair go, whatever, you got to laugh, mate, don't take anything seriously. And so we've got small groups of Aborigines, all political activists, minorities, and the majority say nothing because they can't be bothered or they don't think it's a big deal. I'm saying it's a big deal. Aborigines, woke movement, the transgender movement, political correctness movement, climate emergency movement, Islamic culture in this country, and the desire for alternative legal systems. I say your job, my job, is to push back against cultural change that you and I don't want. Our job is to push back. Our job is to not comply. Our job is not to silently accept that a minority wants something to happen, because if we shut up those cultural changes will be adopted, as they have been in UK, to its great detriment. Culture can develop in good ways and in wrong ways, right ways, wrong ways. I say it's up to us to make sure it develops in the right way. And that's, when I say us, I say a significant majority of a nation, because they are the people who craft the culture. That's the way people behave. And then what will happen is they bring in laws like they're bringing in the UK to stop you living life how you want to live it. That's the point. You will lose your freedom to live life on your terms. Now, this is crucial at this time to note the impact of President Trump on what's happened. You look at the executive orders there, he is attacking this whole syndrome that has been imposed by the Biden administration over the last 4 years, and I've been opposed to it, and I'm hopeful that the Trump decisions and the Trump presidency will push back against these crazy movements like wokeness, political correctness, transgender movements, and climate emergency nonsense. So, speak up. Do not comply. Do not silently just put up with it if you don't like it. Do not be too kind. That's like being too kind to your children because you don't want to upset them. That's a losing strategy, and you will lose your culture of your nation if you are too kind. There are principles that you have to stick to, and you have to be willing to upset people to speak your truth. I urge you to do so. That's what this show is about. I'm speaking my truth. I speak up in meetings. I speak up regardless of whether it offends people or triggers them. And I urge you to do that, because otherwise you will lose your nation's culture. I thought of a health tip during the week that I really want. A number of situations I've come up with that whenever you take a pharmaceutical drug and put that into your body, or an injection of any sort, and I saw this recently with one of my buddies who was traveling to Kenya, read the drug insert, read the jab insert. This was a yellow fever injection for someone going to Kenya. One of the side effects of the yellow fever injection is death. Do you like that? I said to my mate, I wouldn't take it. Not in any pink fit would I take a yellow fever injection. And for the reasons that you've heard me talk about. So that's the health tip. Now, Australian humour. You got to laugh, mate. Well, here's an interesting book. You know, Philip Adams, famous Australian journalist, The Penguin Book of More Australian Jokes. And I opened it at page 51, and I thought, okay, here's a joke for you, spot of humour for you, you know. And I thought about this because it reminds me of Julie and me in a fashion. You'll understand when I tell you this joke. After years of marriage, the Aussie couple was still hopelessly in love and had a marvellous sex life. But after a mild heart attack, the doctor told him that he had to give up sex. In your delicate state, intercourse would almost certainly be fatal, said the doctor. So the husband and wife agreed that they'd sleep apart. She upstairs, he downstairs. For a week they endured this, tossing and turning, unable to sleep and feeling increasingly randy. Randy is a quintessential Aussie term. Then, next night they met on the stairs. Darling, she said, I was just on my way down to kill you, said the wife. Ha ha, funny you should say that, dearest. I was just coming up to commit suicide. Isn't it wonderful when married couples have great sex? All right. So I hope today's show makes a beneficial difference to your life, a life that I believe is meant to be all that you're capable of making of it. And I hope I provoke you to take an interest in your national culture on this Australia Day, whenever your national culture's celebration day is. If you're new to the show, check the links for our foundational principles and my background and my websites. If you have any questions, send me an email or suggested topics. I'm happy to cover topics. And again, thanks for watching or listening. And until our next show, may your week be full of passion, learning, fun, fulfillment, and ever-increasing self-awareness. Have a great week. See you next week. Bye.